at $550 lot rent, every lot you fill is like an extra $90,000 of equity. Our taxes just tripled on us. And it was no big deal because I knew it was going to happen because I took the time to call the county and figure out what was going to happen to the taxes. And that's a big, like that's a massive increase that will usually hit you in most places. What's the cash on cash? And they'll be like, oh, year one's only 2%, and then next year's 6%. I can go buy a bond for 4%. Yeah. Why wouldn't I just go buy a bond, right? Yeah. You're missing the other 3 ways that it's also paying you that you just don't see right away, but are actually in most cases much bigger.
Hey everybody, my name is Trent. I'm the guy behind Invest with Trent. And on this episode, I am joined by a good friend of mine and someone that I've been investing with for I think 4 or 5 years now as a limited partner in his deals. So Cory, for 5 years now. Cory, welcome to the show. Let's start before we dive in. We're going to be talking about underwriting because it's an incredibly important part for any investor, be it GP or LP, because that is where you're going to figure out where the landmines are and hopefully avoid them, and where the opportunities are and hopefully take advantage of them. So it's basically the math. Does this particular deal pencil out to achieve the financial goals that I have for this particular deal? So before we dive into the weeds, and we're going to be talking about initially a little bit about deal sourcing and initial screening, then we're going to get pretty deep. Cory's going to share his screen and we're going to do some financial underwriting for you, and we're going to demystify it and not make it complex. So if you're not a spreadsheet geek, Cory is. I'm kind of one, but I'm going to make sure that we don't get too far into the weeds and that we keep this both and somewhat entertaining and absolutely educational. And if we have time, we're going to talk about the rent roll deep dive, but we might have to come back on another meeting. I'm pretty sure we're going to have to come back another time and do that because I think we're going to run out of time. So Cory, with the stage set, tell us a little bit, if you can get this down to like 2 minutes or less, where you started. You were an engineer and then you did a deal, and then, you know, when that was and what you're doing today. Just give us the super condensed history.
Yeah. So when I started, I was a structural engineer, hence why I'm a spreadsheet guy. I was in 2015, I was working 60 to 80 hour weeks. We had just had our first kid, my wife and I felt like I was missing seeing him grow up. I was going crazy. I was going into work before he woke up in the morning, coming home, he was already asleep. So many days I wouldn't see him asleep. There was a whole week that went by at one point where I literally did not see my son awake. One day during that whole week. And it was Sunday afternoon. I was in the office, of course, working on some deadline that I thought was important. And I was like, screw this. I'm going to go home and at least give my kid a bath and put him to bed. Right. And I went home. And when I got there, I went to take him from my wife. And he did this stranger danger thing like he might do with an uncle that he has not met yet, where he starts screaming, crying, clawing, trying to get back to mom. Who is this guy that's trying to take me away from mom? And I had become a stranger to my son. It broke my heart. At that point, I did not do any investing other than just sticking some money in a 401k. But I knew like that was my kind of moment where I was like, I have to do something. I cannot do this until I'm 65. So I fast forward, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Oh my gosh, assets that pay you. My mind explodes. Why didn't I think of this earlier? I was 34 years old when I read that book. And they should teach that stuff in school. But so I decided we were going to invest in real estate. My wife and I, we said, okay, you have to pick a direction so that you can start going. So we said we're going to buy duplex, threeplex, fourplex was our original buy box. And I'm a nerd, so I figured out how do you analyze these things? Oh, it's called a pro forma. Okay, how do you make a pro forma? And I built my very first pro forma right then, and I started analyzing a bunch of deals. And I quickly got discouraged by what I was finding even back then. No cash flow to be found. Like, what is all this Robert Kiyosaki? Where's all the cash flow you're talking about? And then I stumbled across a mobile home park for sale on Craigslist and got interested, punched that into my spreadsheet and was like, oh, this is much better. And kind of went down the rabbit hole from there. So we bought our first 5 parks, first 5 years, just my wife and I buying parks. And then we pivoted. That was 2016 to 2021. And then 2021, I partnered with my brother-in-law and we started raising some capital to go buy more deals. And I fell in love with the asset class and the process and all of it. So.
Okay. And over the, like we mentioned at the beginning, I think I'm in gosh, like 5 or 6 of your deals now. I don't remember off the top of my head. Maybe it's 4 or 5, but
I went
it's
back
been,
and looked because you said let's look at the first deal we did,
yeah,
and I was like, which one? It was our very first one that we raised capital for. You were in, so you've been in since we started raising
perfect.
capital. So
And let me just tell you that my wife and I are exceptionally pleased with the rates of return that we have earned because they've been nothing shy of phenomenal. So let's talk a little bit about phase. Oh, and by the way, how many pads, just for the folks, it's curious how big you've scaled this. How many pads are you at now?
we're at about 500 right now, and the goal is to be. I want to be at 4,000 pads by 2035 is the goal. 4,000 families housed technically
Yep.
by
Okay.
family 2035 is the goal.
All right. Phase one, before you get to financial underwriting, you got to find something to financially underwrite. So let's talk a little bit about deal sourcing and initial screening. So when a park first hits your radar, what are the 3 things that you're going to look at in the first 10 minutes to go either, yeah, I need to do a deeper dive, or nah, this is not even worth looking at?
Yeah, so I break all of the DD down into like I've got an acronym. It's ideal. So it's infrastructure, density, economics, age of home, and location. And so all of the things that we're looking at kind of fall into those 5 buckets. So the very first thing we look at is location. Because if it's not somewhere that we want to be, then there's no reason. Everything else you can solve with enough money. So if the price
Yeah.
is good enough and you can raise enough money, maybe it needs new sewer lines. Okay, let's get it for a lower price and raise more money and replace the sewer lines, right? But you can't pick it up and move it. So the
Yeah,
first
you
thing
can't fix, then you move it.
definitely is location.
What are the next 2 after location?
So it's location, and then so if the location is like, hey, that's somewhere that we want to be, then it's like, okay, what's the size of the then it's the rest of those things. What's the size of the park? What's the infrastructure? What's the occupancy, right? Like does
Okay.
it look like how does it look like the juice is worth the squeeze here? Like how much effort is it going to be relative to how much upside is there?
And is there a minimum lot count for you these days to make the economics work?
We were actually just talking about this yesterday. So technically we have a buy box sheet that technically says 50 plus, but we frequently find ourselves going below that. So I think what it really comes down to is it's like a to make the economics work. Like any deal will pencil, right? Like we can do a 30 pad deal and put an amount of work in and make a good return, or we can do a 100 pad deal and we can make a similar, if we found it for the right price, right? We can produce a similar rate of return for the investors. The 100 pad deal would just have more investors who get to make
Hmm.
that return. So for us, it's a little bit of like it's going to take us about the same amount of effort to do the 30 pad deal versus the 100 pad deal. So it's a little bit like if we're going to go put a bunch of effort into like, hey, this deal is going to take a ton. There's a whole bunch of empty lots, and we got to do a bunch of construction. We got to repave the road and a bunch of work. We want to make sure the deal's big enough from that perspective to make it kind of worth the effort. And then the other thing that with deal size, there's a few different factors that go into kind of like there's like the economy of scale thing, right? Like where the managers, the for example, the price that you might have to pay an on-site manager to manage a 100 pad park is more than a 50 pad park, but not double. So you start to get some economies of scale on those
Hmm.
expenses that help the bigger parks work. So there's definitely, I mean, probably somewhere around that 30-ish pad is probably like a floor of, unless it's right near a bunch of other parks, it would maybe be hard to get that to work. But yeah, and I think there's a sweet spot for us. I think that 50 to 100 is actually like a really nice sweet spot because the small deals can be really good, like I said. And if they're say it's 100% occupied, 100% tenant owned, and we're getting it at a great price, that's an easy deal. That's not going to take a lot of work, and everybody's going to make a good return. So that's the kind of thing we might bend that minimum deal. Like we did one in just outside of Toledo last year that was that it was 100% occupied, 100% tenant owned, needed some roads, not that hard, and now it's like, hey, it's a great deal, and it doesn't, everyone's going to make a great return on that deal. Doesn't take a ton of work, and that was 30 pads. So it doesn't. That's fine, but for the most part, that 50 to 100 I like because you still stay away from the stuff that the big guys are competing for.
Yeah.
Once you get past 100 pads, that's where all the institutional buyers want it, and so it's really hard to. every time I get excited about a 100 pad deal, there ends up being something majorly wrong with it. Unless it's like a portfolio of smaller parks, but yeah, it's either the price is good, but the location sucks, or the location's great, but there's so many people bidding on it that it's never going to cash flow at that price. Like, so
Let
the
me
100
interrupt you
plus is
there.
hard.
Let me interrupt you there if I
Yeah.
may. Let's talk about location, because that's my next question. You mentioned,
Mm.
you can't move a park, you can't change a neighborhood. Talk to me about what makes a good market in terms of the demographics and the economics. And
Hmm.
obviously, neighborhood is a subsector of the market, like what city and
Right.
town are you going to be in? So what do you look for in the market that you want to invest in?
We look at a whole bunch of different metrics that all add up to I want to we I feel like mobile home parks are a solution to the affordable housing crisis. They are very affordable when most of the country cannot afford housing. They are the most affordable form of housing. They're the only type that works without Section 8 and LIHTC and all these government assistance things that they just work as they are. So for that thesis to hold, we need to be in a place with an affordable housing problem. One of the main first things that we look at if it's a new location that's coming in on a deal is we pull up what is the, and I have a custom GPT that I run that gives me it does the research and gives me all my stats on the area. That's pretty handy. But it's what is the median home price? What are the rents? What is the vacancy? What's the days on market of the houses? All these things that kind of add up to, hey, does this place have an affordable housing problem or not? If the homes are $300,000 and we can sell a brand new 3 bedroom, 2 bath, single wide home that's really, really nice for $70,000, that's a really good deal for somebody. If you can go get a 3 bed, 2 bath home for $100,000, that's a regular house, then our 3-2 mobile home doesn't really have much of a cost advantage. It's going to be really hard to compete. I guess that I don't know if that answers the question, but it's
It
really
does.
like, is there an affordable housing problem? That's the key thing.
So have you tried? So Ben from Fundrise talked recently about their new Real AI tool. Have you tried that yet? Because it is phenomenal.
I have heard of the real. I have not played with the real AI, but you're not the first person who has mentioned that to
So
me.
yesterday, and folks, I would strongly encourage you to give this thing a try, because it is. If you listen to Ben's episode and you talk about how they built it, it has access to data that ChatGPT does not have. And as a result, so I've been messing with it. And if you just go to Fundrise, or you just Google Fundrise Real AI tool, it's currently free. And you can literally just go analyze, type in the city and the state, and then say, analyze this market. And it goes
Mm.
through, it takes about 5 minutes, and it does this incredibly detailed analysis. Again, built upon a bunch of data that ChatGPT or any of the other LLM tools do not have. So, for example, yesterday I was listening to some content. I was actually doing some due diligence on a lead sponsor. They do hard money lending in Wichita, Kansas. And so the very first thing I did was I went over to Wichita and I typed it in. 7% year over year rent growth. It talks about it talks about how many permits have been issued.
Wichita. Wow.
It talks about average incomes. It compares it to the nearby markets. It talked about the huge expansion to the school that's already been the university that's already been approved. It
Oh.
talked about this pending program that was subject to some legislation or something that had to come through. And like it went on and on and on. And at the end of it, like I was looking at it, I was like, man, that is a phenomenal cash flowing market, not price appreciation market. Phenomenal cash flowing market. And then I said to it, are there any other markets that you like more than Wichita for multifamily? And it basically said, nope, this is it. On a risk adjusted basis,
Hmm.
Wichita is the number one market in the US. And when you look at the information that it gives, pretty hard to argue with. And they like Fundrise spent 2+ years building this thing for themselves because they are heavy into the build to rent market and a number of other asset classes because we invest with them also. And anyway, it's a pretty phenomenal tool, and I would
I'll
venture to
check that
guess you
out.
might switch off your Chat GPT once you've given it a try.
Nice. No, I'll check that out. I've got our GPT pretty dialed as far as it knows but I'll definitely check that out. It sounds good. The one thing I would say on locations is it depends on the asset you're looking at too. So it's not like a one size fits all. So a good example of this, I really like Cincinnati. I really like Columbus, those two
Yep.
MSAs. I don't understand Dayton. It's right next to these other two MSAs. The homes go for half the price. There's tons of vacancy. I can't figure out, like, Dayton scares me as a market. But I have heard other investors who are non-mobile home park, they're rental investors who are like, Dayton's one of the best markets in the country on a price to rent basis because there's so much distress. You can get these really cheap houses that still rent for a
Hmm.
decent amount of money, and they're not competing with home buyers, they're competing with renters. So I do think so for us, we want that delta between the home price and the home sales price.
Yeah.
Whereas other like if you're doing a standard rental, you're more looking at the price to rent ratio. So it's a slightly different, like, a lot of the markets overlap, but there's definitely some that are good one way and not so good another.
Also good
So
the other. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to jump into phase two for the folks who've been waiting for us. We're going to share the screen now. So Cory, go ahead and share your screen. And we are literally going to do a master class on underwriting. I put those shades on. Put a master class. I call them my old man shades.
my
We're going to
old
do a
man, I gotta
master.
say,
We're going to do a master class on underwriting the very first deal that I ever invested in with Cory. It has worked out, and you can talk about the deal as we go through it and how things have transpired. And I know that you've significantly updated your underwriting process over the last couple of years, and I'll let you speak to that as well. So you should be able to share your screen now. All right, Cory, walk us through the process.
okay, so this is a slide deck that I've got that was a whole mobile home park presentation, not just underwriting. But I want to do an example here, which was the very first deal that we raised capital for. So this is one you're invested in. This deal was in Arizona, Rita, so it's right outside of Tucson, Arizona. It was a 47 lot mobile home park plus a house. It's got a lot of very common. They'll have like a single family house there that's rented as well. And so we bought this park in 2021 for $2.1 million, dollars, and we raised $800,000 of capital to do that purchase. So that's the park. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of the initial projections. I'll show kind of what we came up with. Then I'll talk about what actually transpired, and then I'll show how we've ended up as of today. So and I've got the underwriting model for that I can pull up here as well. So,
Yeah, because that's the
so
part I want to make sure that we spend some time with as well as the actual
yes,
underwriting model.
exactly. So the deal here is we came in, it was an average lot rent. There were a bunch of people that were still in the 200s on lot rent. We averaged 340 was the average lot rent. It had some vacancy. When we bought it, the weeds were up to our knees. It had some vacancy. The manager was terrible. He actually did us a favor and quit the day before we closed. Um, so we hired a new manager. Um, we hired a new manager and we filled in the vacancies. We took care of a bunch of the capex, like the things to. We actually went door to door and knocked on every door and asked, in addition, here's your new lease, and if you could fix one thing about this community, what would it be? So we got ideas on the things that the residents actually wanted for the improvements. The biggest thing was just it had insufficient dumpster service. The dumpsters were always overflowing, so that was
Hmm.
actually a very easy fix. A lot of times you'll think you need to go do all these really expensive things, and you'll talk to everybody, and it's like, oh, they really just want to have to not race each other to the dumpster on trash day. And so we just added an extra dumpster and an extra pickup day, and everybody loved us. And then we also we it was dark, so we added solar street lights, which are another cost-effective way that you can improve things. We had fencing, signage,
Let me interrupt
we
you. You're getting off track,
landscaping.
man. I know. You.
All right.
I got to keep you in
Well,
the lane.
it,
Underwriting. Underwriting.
it is. But the point of the underwriting is that there's this value add concept, right? And that's going to play into that's how you make a return on these things. So the key thing with underwriting, what is underwriting? I guess let's start with what is underwriting before I dive into a spreadsheet with this cell and that cell, right? Like the key thing with underwriting is it's just you're trying to project returns. So you're going to put money in, and then you're going to have a bunch of cells that are going to be like, okay, here's what we think is going to, our best guess is year one, here's how much money is going to come out. Year two, how much money is going to come out. Year three, and so on. So that's what underwriting is. It boils down to if you're an investor, you're putting money in, and the output you want is like how much money's coming out every year. So that's what you're trying to get to. That's all it is. And based on that, you can calculate different types of returns. And so the idea is you're going to buy something that you can improve. And so the powerful thing about all commercial real estate is it's valued based on this thing called net operating income that I'll show you in the sheet. And so if you can make that net operating income go up, not only do you cash flow more because it's now producing more cash, but you've increased the value of the property. So unlike buying a single family house in a neighborhood that you think is good and hoping that the value goes up, you can actually say, hey, I know we can fill these lots. I've run the test out on these things. I know what the lot rent is because I've studied it. I did a test ad and everything. So I know that these are going to sell at this price. And each of those lots, based off the extra revenue from that lot rent, is going to add this much NOI, which based off of a cap rate is going to produce this much extra value. So at $550 lot rent, every lot you fill is like an extra $90,000 of equity. So this is the concept behind the whole thing. This is the reason that commercial real estate is so powerful, is because you control the appreciation, or at least you have a say in it. It's not just what's the economy doing, right? So how do we do that? So this was our original underwriting model that we used. This I actually got from another mastermind that I attended. This was like one of the templates that I just edited. At some point it was so clunky, I decided to build my own underwriting model from the ground up, which I'll show you in a second, which is what we currently use. And this is version 2. The version 1 was that original one that I built to look for duplexes. What you're going to see in any underwriting model, you're typically going to have an inputs tab where you're going to input all of the information. What's the financing? How many lots are occupied now? If that's not 100%, then how many is it going to be in the future? So you can see, hey, we started with 45, and I said, in my assumption at the time, I said we'll fill three the first year and 2 the next year, right? And now we got to full occupancy. So you're going to have an occupancy thing. You're going to have an expense thing. And sorry, it's been a couple of years since I've looked at this model, but here you go. So partnership returns, what if we sold? You're going to have a whole bunch of stuff. And so then you're going to have another page that's doing a whole bunch of calculations based off of those inputs. That's going to calculate all of your stuff. You're going to have your gross income, your expenses, and then your net operating income. Below that, you're going to subtract out some below the line stuff that's like not necessarily park specific, like maybe the CPA.
Why don't
and
we?
stuff.
Is there any? I'm sorry to interrupt you again. Is there any
Yeah.
reason we don't jump into your latest model now and
Yeah, let's
literally
do
go
that.
through it? I don't want to just like zoom over this and give it a high level overview. I really want to get into the
Yeah.
details so that people
Sure
understand
thing.
what underwriting actually looks like.
Okay, so here's my current model that we're using right now. And so this one I pulled up is the Ash Grove deal that we bought a couple years ago, which I
Okay.
believe you're in as well. So this is our current model. And so it kind of goes from left to right on the tab. So this is like the overall organization, right? And I'll go into the sections here. So you've got your inputs, you've got your what we'll call pro forma, which I'll dive into in a second. And then you've got your waterfall. Those are the 3 things, and the rest of it's kind of doing stuff in the background. So the input. So the main things that are going into it are your unit mix. So like how many lots do you have? How much rent are they currently paying? How much is like what we call market rent, which is what you could bring a new tenant in at.
Mhm.
And we don't take people up to that necessarily in year 1. We might get them, but the existing I've got the model set up to calculate. So your existing residents catch up over a number of years. And as you fill lots, the new residents come in at the higher rent.
Yeah.
And so you've got different types of units that might rent for different things. You could have park-owned homes, which is kind of a unique thing with mobile home parks. There's some potential revenue streams with park-owned homes that like the bank won't necessarily count towards the value of your park, but it's real cash flow. They also come with additional expenses. So that's your unit mix. It's how many lots, what kind of lots, and what kind of rent can they produce. There's a whole lot of other assumptions over here on the right-hand side that are, I'll always go through like the sections. So you've got like the acquisition, so your financing, your refinance. So this is basically like all your lending and like how much are you going to spend on due diligence? What kind of closing costs do you anticipate? What kind of fee are we charging so that we can actually execute the business plan on the deal? This is like paying our employees and software. We have expenses to actually run the thing. You have then I've got the next section is like stabilizations. This is kind of the value add phase. So this is how fast are we catching people up to the market rent? In this case, we said we'll do it $50 a year. So we're not pricing people out, but we do want to catch them up. How many homes do we think we're going to sell in a year? What are we going to spend on those homes? What can we sell them for? Note that we're just assuming we're buying and selling for the same price, right? We're not even assuming any home sale profit, and it still calculates out great. So if we can make a home sale profit, awesome, but not relying on it. Then once you're full and everybody's caught up on rent, you still have a cash flowing property, right? So then I've got the assumptions that are like, these are the ones that kind of just go on forever. So what do we think the market lot rent's going to do? What do we think the expense, how much of the inflation going to be? All these things, right? Because your expenses are probably going to go up every year. So that's what these assumptions are here. And then you've got some exit things down here. Cap rate is a big one. If you're ever looking at someone's model, you always want to ask what exit cap rate they assumed and how did they get to that number, because especially if a large percentage of your return is based on them planning to sell the property later, the exit cap can swing the returns drastically one way or another. It always can, but especially if you're like at 5-year hold and sell, what cap rate is that based off of, and where did you get that? Is that optimistic or pessimistic? Is it conservative? So that's a really, really big one. A bunch of other things
you mean
here.
You don't forecast buying every deal at a 10 cap and selling at a 5 cap?
If we could all go back in time to 2016 and hold it and sell in 2022, then you could do that. So that's kind of some of the stuff that goes into it. And I guess one key rule that you want to figure out, like if you're ever reviewing someone's model, like there's a whole lot of stuff in here. One of the big questions you want to ask are like on the big input items, on really all the input items, where did they come from? And the person creating the model should have a neutral third party. They should not be just inventing these numbers. They should be getting them from somewhere that's not
I was
them.
literally just going to ask you this. Where are you getting the rent roll from? Where are you getting all of the expense items from? Because if you're just taking the numbers that are coming to you in the offering memorandum, there's a pretty good chance those numbers are not very accurate.
Correct. Yeah, another rule of thumb is it's helpful when the brokers have underwriting stuff in there so you can know what they're thinking, but it's always wrong and it's always extremely optimistic. So they're going to leave stuff out on the expense side and they're going to assume unrealistic stuff on the income side every time. So where you get these from. So there's really two phases. There's when you're looking at the deal pre-contract. So I'm a big believer in doing a lot of this underwriting up front so that we're sending good offers that if everything they told us are true, will stick. And so versus a lot of people just throw a bunch of offers out there and figure it out after the fact. That's a really good way to burn broker bridges. So because we do this work up front, we have a lot of brokers that like to work with us and are sending us off market deals. That's the bulk of our deal flow. That's how we get it, is by doing this work before the offer. But there's no way to validate all this because you need to get an offer out in a couple of days, right? So pre-offer, we are basing all of this on the information we are given. So what did the broker tell us? Can we get a rent roll? I always ask for a rent roll and a profit and loss statement so that we can get an idea of the expenses. And our underwriting, I'm basing on a combination of those two things. I've also looked at
hold on, let me interrupt.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that before you make the offer, you're doing your preliminary underwriting based upon the numbers that are in the OM, the offering memorandum.
Correct.
And then
and
in
the
due
materials they
diligence,
send. Yep.
you're asking for the actual utility statements and the bank statements and on the insurance statements, and so that you can verify all those numbers, because now that's going to give you negotiation leverage to wind your offer back because the information in the OM was not as accurate as it should have been.
Bingo. That's exactly right. So that's exactly right. So due diligence, it's not like let's just send an offer at whatever they're asking for and figure it out once it's under contract, because they're never going to send you another. They're never going to send you another deal again. It's let's do the offer. I'm going to do the underwriting, but I'm going to base it on what they told me. Mm-hmm. And then the point of due diligence is to validate all those numbers. And so if a seller were like, when I'm selling parks, what I try to do is go over the top on disclosing things so that if you're trying to do this, like I'm just going to, cut you down after the fact because that's my plan, I'm not going to do any homework up front. I try to take away those excuses as a seller. Not many sellers do that, but that's my thesis on it because they're going to find it all during due diligence anyway, right? But yes, during due diligence is when you can validate utility bills very easy. Utility costs, just look at the utility bills and call the utility company. One lesson learned on a property, talk about like things I've learned that I've messed up before is not only do you want to look at the utility bills and call the utility company to confirm those are correct. You also want to ask the utility company, are you planning to increase your rates anytime soon? That's one I did not used to ask, and we got burned on one deal that way, where the water and sewer bills went way up. So that's a good question to ask. The rent roll. The rent roll is a good way to validate the rent roll is with the bank statements because you can confirm that the people that are on there, the income coming into the bank account um, actually
Yep.
matches the residents that are there. Um, some of the things that you might, so you've got all the income stuff up here. You've got the expenses that you're going to put in down here. And so a lot of these taxes is a big one. You can see we just had this tax increase on Ash Grove and it increased
Yeah. Did you
3x.
ever? Did you ever have a
This
tax
is what
increase?
I said it should go to about 27. It did exactly what I said. So our taxes just tripled on us. And it was no big deal because I knew it was going to happen because I took the time to call the county and figure out what was going to happen to the taxes. And that's a that's a massive increase that will usually hit you in most places that you could easily just look at theirs and say like, I'm just going to increase it by 5% or 10% or double it. Even if you were trying to be conservative and double it, well, ours just tripled. So
Hmm.
you really, really want to look at and you can call the
Now,
county. That's an easy phone call to the county to figure out how they assess that.
that didn't go up because you increased the value of the asset. That went up just because the county wanted to increase
It went
taxes.
up because the previous owner hadn't sold it in forever. So we didn't increase the value. The county hadn't kept up with the
Yeah.
value. So their valuation was much less than the purchase price. So in some states, you don't have to disclose it. Like Idaho, you don't actually have to list the purchase price. So they won't know. But in most states, you do have to disclose it. And so it's just a public record what you
Yeah.
bought it for. And so the county very easily can come along and say, oh, well, we had it appraised at 1 million and you just bought it for 3 million. So I guess we were off. Sweet. Triple the taxes. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so that's a big one that you definitely want to watch out for.
Okay. So in
Um,
OPEX, we've got pretty typical stuff: travel insurance, legal
yep.
repairs, snow, garbage, utilities, office admin, bank fees, all pretty normal stuff. But again, if somebody's underwriting for the first time, maybe they're going to forget some of those items. Okay.
And pro tip on these things, look at what your accounting software is going to be and make sure that this is something once again, I learned after the fact. Don't just invent these categories in here or go off of someone else's thing. Look at how you want to actually track them in your accounting and make sure that your pro forma matches the same exact categories because then it becomes really easy after the fact to go back and look at like, hey, what like we just updated our historic numbers across our whole portfolio. And so we know exactly how many dollars per lot we spend on each of these categories on average.
Hmm.
And so that can be a really good guide. I mean, obviously some of it you have to look at like the snow numbers if you're in a spot that doesn't snow won't be there, right? So there's
Yeah.
some discretion, but at least it's like a good guideline to say like, hey, do the seller's numbers kind of make sense here? Are we missing something? Because some of them too, like the big one to validate is repairs and maintenance, and that's tough because it's not like the utility bill where you can just call and say like, how much do they pay every month? So this is one where they always underreport. It's the kind of thing where like, oh, we haven't had much repairs and maintenance. Well, you still better budget for a good amount. You can see this
Hmm.
one, their P&L showed 2,000 and I'm budgeting 15,000 a year.
And how did you
Um,
arrive at the $15,000 number? Because this was one of your, or this isn't actually this deal. Ash Grove was not one of your first deals, so you had experience helping you here. But how would you arrive at that number um, if you didn't necessarily have all that experience?
yeah. And so this is one where it's a little bit of a get, you've got to guess, right? Are we going to have three water leaks this year or two or one or none? I don't know. And the number is going to change depending on how many, right? So you don't actually know. So I guess a few, this does kind of do some experience. We settled this one on 200 bucks a lot. That's what we settled on.
Okay.
The kind of old industry standard that's dated, I would not use this number now, but this was like the pre-COVID number was 150 bucks a lot was kind of what a lot of people would use. you can see we've averaged 341. So we've actually averaged higher than 200 here.
Hmm.
Um, but we had a few properties that were very high maintenance that skewed that number up. That I happened to know that. And this property had a particular trait to it that it was direct build. So the water lines aren't our problem; they're the city's problem.
Hmm.
So that's where we were able to kind of use a little bit of judgment and go a little bit, and we've been below this. So we've been actually far below this since we bought it. So, but you want to. It's like it's a little bit of a guessing game here where you got to put enough so that you're conservative. You want your actuals to come in lower than this number. So you got it. This is an area where you need to be conservative, but you don't want to be so conservative that you kill the deal for no reason. So
Yep.
if I've got a few other parks where we've had, multiple water leaks that have skewed my FIG historic up, I don't want to lose the deal because I'm betting on the same thing here when we don't even own the water lines here. So, but vice versa, I might use a higher number than this if it's a park with really old water lines. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Yeah. This is definitely one that takes a little bit of judgment to figure out, but um, yeah. I mean, at some point
Okay,
you've got to
so
just make your best guess.
at this point in time, you have input all of your revenue assumptions, which is essentially rent roll. You
Hmm.
input all of your OPEX assumptions, which is going to come initially from the OM, because
Yep.
that's what they're doing. Everything initially is going to come from the OM.
Correct.
Once you have input all the assumptions, then what's your sheet going to tell you from there?
Yeah, so it's going to do a few things. So there's a page over here that's figuring out what the rent and occupancy is every year. That's just a bunch of calculations that are doing what I told it to do over here.
So these are
I'm happy.
assumptions about increasing rent rolls and assumptions about increasing occupancy rate.
Right. Yeah. And what my kind of convention, if I turn it red if I want to overwrite something. So I said, hey, like I think the number I used in there was we'll fill 6 homes a year. I said, let's do six the first year, and by then our systems are going. I bet we can do 12 the next year. So I said 6, 12, 3 as far as our
Right.
infill projections, for example. And then same thing down here. You've got I'm tracking what the market lot rent is every year. So that increases along with the expenses. And then I'm tracking what the original tenant rent is every year as well,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can get your rent projections and then all that stuff. So all of the stuff from here, I mean, this is all just really math. Like if you just do the math, you'll get there. All the stuff from here goes over to the pro forma tab, and so this is an important tab. The the pro forma and the waterfall and the sensitivities tab are really important tabs. And then that all feeds into this kind of summary tab that shows what your returns are.
Okay.
So for the pro forma tab, this is the one where it's saying at the top here is our income. So
What is
this
loss to
first
lease?
Good question. So yeah, so the way that the income's calculated, so and this I got from this is how the multifamily guys do it too. So you calculate your gross potential rent. So this is if you were 100% occupied with everybody paying market rents. This is the most that your property could produce. And then
Okay, and
you've got a
that's row
few
six.
things that yes, correct.
Okay.
Gross. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I've got a few hidden rows here that didn't apply because we didn't have them, but there's well, just trust me, they're here. So, this is gross lot rent. This is all mobile homes here. I would have other rows if we had single family homes or park owned
Yep.
homes, the
Yep.
different kinds of gross rent. But that would all sum up into this gross rent row six. And then you don't have all your residents paying market rent. Some of your residents are paying less, right? Like your original tenants are probably paying less. In most mobile home parks, the owners may not have raised their rent in a bunch of years. They haven't even kept up with, even been close to keeping up with inflation since they were built. So
Mm-hmm.
it's oftentimes way less. So the loss to lease is saying, hey, you don't, all your residents aren't paying the market rent. You have a bunch that are paying less. And so this is a number that goes down as we gradually increase
Mm-hmm.
the people's the existing tenants' rent to
Yep.
catch them up over a number of years. So that's loss to lease. There's also Rubs is the next one here, which is basically like, are we billing back for water and sewer? So this is additional income if sometimes you can have sub meters that you basically
Mm-hmm.
bill everybody back for the water and sewer. In this case, this is all just trash because it's direct billed water sewer by the city, but you can have that income show up here. Other income. This will be, and this I'll usually just validate and get from kind of what they've been collecting, but you're going to have some additional, people are going to pay late. You're going to have some
Yeah.
late fees, this kind of stuff. So that's what that is. And you can see that's like a very small percentage compared to the total. So, I think it's usually like 1 to 2%. You've got concessions. So this would be if we have an on-site manager who is getting free rent. We usually in this park we have the on-site manager does not live on site, so this one is a zero.
Hmm.
But typically we have basically 1 unit of free rent here, or some portion of a unit of free rent, depending on the situation. Vacancy loss is another one that starts high and goes down. This is
Yeah.
how many units aren't paying rent. So you have to not only
Yeah.
do you have to subtract out the rent where people are paying less than market, you
Yeah.
also have to subtract out the rent for vacant
Where
units.
there's no rent being collected at all, and then you got to subtract out when there's rent supposed to be collected, but they're bouncing checks. Collection
Right, and
loss.
that's collection loss. Exactly.
Right.
And I have some settings in there. Well, I'll never let the vacancy go to zero. I usually use like a 3%, like I'll never take the occupancy basically to higher than 97. So there'll always be vacancy loss, even if I'm projecting that we've got it to
Yeah.
100% full. So there's always going to be some turnover. And then the collections loss, same thing. Collections loss is this is basically, hey, a tenant who didn't pay rent for a few months, and by the time we got rid of them, there's a balance that we're never going to collect, right? So that's what
Okay.
that is.
So in
Um,
accounting speak, this is just basically your P&L for your business.
Yes, and the whole underwriting process is it's a advanced forecast of a P&L. That's all it
Yeah.
is. It's the whole thing. And so then you've got your operating expenses, the same stuff as before, year one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. We've already kind of been through what those were on the last tab, but now we're projecting what happens to those each year. And so this is most of them just increased by that inflation number that I put in.
Hmm.
A few of them are like tied. If some of them might be like some of them might go down, like if you've got insurance, for example, on the park owned homes, as those sell off, you would program that expense number to fade
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
But that's what that is. So that's your operating expenses. And then if you take your gross income minus your operating expenses, you get the all important net operating income. And this is the one that a multiple of this is what your value of your property
Yeah.
is. So if you can make this number go up, your property value goes up. So that's the really important, that's like the most important KPI that we track from a financial
So
perspective.
NOI in year one of 200 and in year 10 it's 500. You're basically doing a 2.5x, assuming your cap rate on the way in and your cap rate on the way out are constant,
Right.
which works out
Exactly.
to an IRR of.
Uh, well, yeah, it depends on your. It's not quite so. It's leverage too, but in this case, our IRR was we are projecting 21 and a 3.1x. So because the interesting thing is like 2.5x on the value. Remember, you're levered, so the investors are only the equity piece. So that's actually much
You get
more than a
more.
2.5x
Yeah.
for the
Yeah. It
investors.
was
That's
if
right.
it was all cash, it would be just 2.5, but you're using debt.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
Um, so that's that. So then you've got some other expenses in here that you need to that don't count against your NOI, but you still need to subtract them from your cash flow. So these are things that are not specific. The way I think about these is these are things that are a person who bought the park would not inherit these expenses, whereas the operating expenses they would inherit. So
Hmm.
these are our asset management fee that we use to run the deal, any kind of capex. So I'm also projecting like ongoing basically an ongoing, what if we need to
Yeah, you're
repave a
building a
road or,
reserve
yeah.
for
E-
emergencies.
exactly. That's what
Okay.
the CapEx set aside is. So I'm subtracting that out of the cash flow. Any kind of expenses to buy and sell homes to fill the park up comes out.
Is that
Our
normally how
debt
you fill an
service.
empty? Sorry to interrupt you again. Is that
Mhm.
normally how you'll fill? Let's say you've got a park with 50 spaces and 45 of them are full. Are you expecting to do advertising to attract people who are then going to buy a new mobile home and slide it into one of those vacant spots? They're
Nope.
going to own the home and they're going to pay pad rent. If not, how does that work?
Yeah, so what you just described, we would call an organic move-in, where somebody brings their own home in, and those happen, but they're rare, and it's not good to count on them. I always take it as a good compliment when it does happen, like, oh,
No,
sweet,
I
like they
was
could move
referring
this
to
thing
they're
anywhere.
buying a
But
new home, not dragging a home that they had somewhere else.
yeah, but whether they're bringing the new home in or they're bringing their own home in, I would call that an organic move. So,
Okay.
so what we typically do is we source either a new or used home. We move it, we pay to move it in, set it up, put the skirting, put the steps,
Got it.
AC heat, all,
So it's
hook the utilities,
turnkey for
get
them.
it turnkey. So they come in and purchase, then we advertise the home for sale. and they purchase the home from us. So
Got it.
that's the model that we do. That's what we count on. If we can get organics where they're going to bring their own home in, that's fantastic. And we have gotten some of those, but that's more rare.
Yeah, I was going to say those are probably pretty rare simply because mobile homes aren't very mobile.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. They're expensive to move. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Okay.
And once people are in there with a paid off home, it's the cheapest housing in town by far.
Yeah.
So they don't tend to move in or out. um, yeah, you've got your debt. I guess the big thing that comes out here is your loan, your mortgage, right? So you've got your mortgage payment comes out, and then at the end of that, you've got what I call the operating cash flow.
Hmm.
So this is just if this is if you're this is basically your NOI minus all the recurring stuff like your mortgage
Hmm.
and all this other stuff. So this is your operating cash flow. And then you've got a couple other things like if you were to buy or sell, that's not really operating, that's like a capital event. So, but
Hmm.
that kind of adds into your true cash flow. And so this is what the deal's spitting out. This isn't necessarily what an individual investor would get. This is the money that the deal's spitting out.
Hmm. An
Um,
individual investor that owned just this park would do better than that.
Right. Well, yeah. Oh, no, yeah. If you were an individual investor that owned just this park, this is what you would earn. This is the cash flow that you would earn. That's the cash flow you'd earn. So then, but we syndicate, right? So that means we're
Hmm.
pooling money from multiple investors. We do the work, investors put up the money, and we share the profits. That's the basic model. And so there's what you call the waterfall tab, which is where you figure out how all the profits share. So the inputs from this tab are the cash flows from operations and the net sale proceeds. So this is going to come from this stuff over here. This is going to come
Hmm.
from these numbers over here.
Hmm.
These go over to this tab over here. And so then you've got a bunch of stuff. So you've got a bunch of things that we calculate over here. So one of them is called the unlevered cash flow. So we take all the debt stuff out. So this is
Hmm.
basically what would the deal do if you had no loan on it?
Hmm.
It's just kind of interesting to know. Then levered is like, okay, but we actually have a loan. So what's the deal doing with the debt? And then we have net, and if this is what the deal's doing with the debt, if you owned it, if you just owned it basically. And then there's net levered where we pull like we've got our fees and everything, like I said, that we pull out since we're running the deal. So, and so then what you've got down here at the end of it is your net levered cash flow. Basically, these are the cash flows right here that
Hmm.
we're going to feed down here. And so then what happens with the cash flow is we've got, and you can see up here, we've got the investors have a 7%, 7% what's called a preferred return.
That's those
So
quarterly
for
checks I get.
that's right. That's right. So yes, the cat, you got to make it rain every quarter. I like that. That's always a good day when I get to send those out. Um, so the money that's actually flowing out. So this is the actual profit the thing is producing. And so then we're like, how does that get divvied up? So it gets divvied up like in a very specific order that we define contractually in the PPM. So there's two types of possible distribution. One is just profit from operations. We took in the rent, we paid the expenses, money's left over, we're distributing it. And the other one is we did a refinance or a sale, something where we're actually
Hmm.
reducing the equity of the property. So that,
Hmm.
that would, I call that like a cash transaction. So in the first scenario, where it's just profits from rents, the first thing is it's got to get everybody caught up on their preferred return. So in this case, if you have $100,000 invested, you need to get your $7,000 a year before me as the GP, as the operator, can take any of the profit.
Hmm.
So once everybody's caught up with that 7%, that's the preferred return. If it's the first category, which is profits from rents, then the rest of it just gets split. 60% goes to the investors and 40% goes to us. Very simple. We're aligned. We have to make the property profitable. So this is the key thing. Another key thing in any kind of investment where you're investing with another operator, you want to make sure the incentives are aligned. And so
Hmm.
different structures can kind of align you to different things. So, but in this way, we have to get it cash flowing more than 7% before we even make anything. And then we split it 60/40. So it's a very simple split. Other setups you can do, there's other more complicated setups you can do, but that's this deal is here. And so if you're selling the property, one other thing you want to look for is you want to make sure you're getting, if they sell the property, you better make sure you're not just getting your preferred return. You want to get your money back and your preferred
Yeah.
return before you split, right? And same with a refinance, right? Because you could technically, theoretically refinance the whole value out of the property, right? So if you're doing these cash transactions where you're reducing the equity, then there's an extra step. So first we catch everybody up with the preferred return again. Once everybody's caught up on a sale or refinance, all the rest of the money, 100% of it goes to the investors until they're all the way paid out. And then we split, then we do the 60-40 split after that. So that's basically what this whole sheet right here is doing. It comes down to a return summary at the bottom. Here's what the LPs are getting out. And then here's the cash on cash every year. Here's the IRR. Here's the equity multiple. And then finally, after all of this, it all goes back to the summary tab where I can see what the investor cash on cash is projected to be each year. I can see what the equity multiple is, which is just what if you add up all the returns for the investors, what multiple are they making on their money? What's the IRR? And there's a bunch of different types of returns you could do. I'm happy to dive into pros and cons and what those are for.
Yeah, so let me just summarize here. So this here is really what you're going to be building into your offering memorandum for limited partners to look at is the summary or the conclusions of all the math that you've done in your underwriting process. Now, to pick off what you just said, there's LP IRR, LP average cash on cash, LP annualized return, and LP equity multiple. Why don't you unpack all four of those for us so there's no confusion?
Yeah, absolutely. And so different deals that you look at, there's lots of ways you can look at returns. And depending on your goals and the model of the deal, like one or the other of these might make more sense for you. So the first thing you got to understand is real estate pays you in four different ways. And this is kind of generic across all real estate. There's cash on cash, which is how much money is hitting your bank every month or every quarter, right? That's pretty easy to understand. How much it's just the amount of money each year in cash flow that's coming in, which are those monthly, quarterly checks based on the rents, divided by how much money you put in the deal. That's your cash on cash return, and that changes, right? It's not one number. In this case, it's 2.5, 6.2, 9.2, 9.6, and I'll kind of get into why the numbers look the way they do in a little bit. But that's what that is. So cash on cash. But that's not and most people focus on that. What's the cash on cash? And they'll be like, oh, year one's only 2%, and then next year's 6%. I can go buy a bond for 4%. Why wouldn't I just go buy a bond? Right?
Yeah.
You're missing the other three ways that it's also paying you that you just don't see right away, but are actually in most cases much bigger. And so the other ways that it pays you are one of them is the loan pay down. So don't forget that the residents, you have a mortgage on this thing, and the residents are paying the mortgage down for you. So they're making your mortgage payment for you. Isn't that nice? So every month when they pay that principal down, that's really a return. You're just not seeing in your bank account yet, but you will when you go to sell or when you go to refinance, you owe less money on the loan, which means there's more money left over for you. So that is a very real return that you are getting. It's just like a forced savings account, if you will, that's going to hit you later. So there's the loan pay down piece. The third one is appreciation. And most people say, don't count on appreciation. That's like gambling. Well, in this case, we're not just buying a house and hoping it goes up. Once again, we're buying something where we control that. We have a say in the NOI. We can force the appreciation.
That's the biggest reason why I love commercial real estate so much. You don't have to wait for the market to go up. You can buy an asset that's been poorly managed, fix that asset, stabilize it, and suddenly it's worth a lot more. When we bought our first commercial property, over 2 years, we made hundreds of percent return for exactly that reason. We had below market rents, we had vacancy, we had all the issues that we've been talking about this. We spent 2 years fixing all that stuff, and the building nearly doubled in value in just 2 years. Good luck doing that with a residential property.
And that's with a flat economy, right? So the economy still impacts it. The economy going down can impact it, but if you can raise that NOI, you've got a defense. You're not helpless to it. And if the economy goes up, which on average over the long term it does, then you've just got wind at your back. But even if it's flat, all these things are like a flat economy projection, right? So that's a big and then that's the third one. The fourth one is tax benefits. And so real estate has some really great tax benefits. can have some really great tax benefits. Those depend a lot on your specific situation. So there's not really a good return model that I'm aware of to account for the tax benefits, but the other three you can. So the cash on cash return, this is the average, but the cash on cash return is really just catching that first one. So the other three here, the other three of these are different ways to measure the total return of those first three: cash flow, principal pay down, and appreciation. So the easiest one to understand is equity multiple. You just add up all the cash flow distributions, and then when you sell or when you project you're going to sell, what would it be worth? How would you split it? How much money would everybody get? Let's add it all together, and let's just divide by the amount you put in and how many multiples did you get on your money. You put in $100,000, you take out $300,000 over the course of the deal. That's a 3x equity multiple, right? So that's the equity multiple. So that's your total amount you're gonna get back, or that you're projected to get back, right? Nothing's ever guaranteed. So that's really easy to understand. But and if you take the equity multiple, 3.11 means you put in 100,000, you got $311,000 out, so $210,000 of profit. In this case, we're looking at a 10-year hold. $210,000, $211,000 of profit is 21.1% average annual return. So also very easy to understand is the AAR. This is just your average. If you just took the total and averaged it out, that's what you get. And so a good comparison to that, if you want to compare to a bond, this is like how a bond pays you. It's not compounding or anything like that. This would be really the one that you would want to compare to a bond. So there's obviously risk and all the different things, and liquidity are maybe different, but if you want to just compare apples to apples on a return basis, if everything goes as projected, which ones, what are we going to do? That's the one I would compare to a bond, is the average annual return, not the cash on cash, because that's really the total that you're getting out. The bond doesn't, I guess bonds are complicated, but assuming the bond doesn't go up or down in value, because they fluctuate, but that's really the most apples to apples. Now, if you want to compare to stocks, you want to look at this third one that's a little more complicated. It's also measuring all three, but it adds in something called time value of money. So if you put in this case, let's just take this. So if you put in $100,000 and you got $311,000 back, but you didn't see a dime of that for 10 years, and then you got your check for $311,000. Or if you put in $100,000 and you got $100,000 the first year, $100,000 the next year, and then you got the remaining $111,000 at the end, which one is a higher return?
Mm-hmm.
So for the first two measures, it would show the same thing. It would still show 21.1 and 3.11x. But if you get your money out sooner, that's actually better for you, because now you can go reinvest that somewhere and start making more money on it. So the IRR rewards you, shows a higher return if you get your money out sooner. So another way to say that was it prioritizes the cash flow over the sale at the end.
Put simply, money now is worth more than money later. It's not even just what you said about the opportunity cost of you being able to take that capital and put it in another deal. Sure, that's absolutely a factor, but just based upon this discounted cash flow model, a payment made to me 10 years from now of $100,000 is, when you discount that to today's value at an appropriate discount rate, which is usually the rate of inflation less whatever you want to compensate for risk, that's not worth $100,000 today. And so IRR allows you to take all that into account.
That's exactly right. And so IRR is basically it's accounting for another way to put it would be, this is the rate of return that this would be equivalent if you got it every single year, if you were reinvesting the returns, is the way to think about it. So whereas the AAR is like comparing to a bond, it's just paying you this flat rate. This is the one that you would compare, and these are close here. They're not always like this. Oftentimes the IRR, it depends on the schedule, but the IRR is what you would compare to, like if you were looking to stocks. Like, what if you were in the S&P 500 with dividends reinvested? Mm-hmm. What return is that? That's kind of like the equivalent of an IRR. As far as like all in and reinvesting, you're reinvesting the earnings.
Okay. So we're going to wrap up soon. We're about an hour, so I know only the hardcore folks are still with us, and the hardcore folks might be asking the same question that I'm still asking, or that I'm asking now, is how do you stress test your assumptions? And I'm assuming that's probably your sensitivities tab.
Yes, it is. And so, and this is the reason
First of
this
all,
one
explain
tab
to
is,
people, in case it's not obvious, what stress testing is. I'm sure pretty much everyone knows, but let's not
yes.
have any ambiguity.
100%. Yeah. So this one tab is the reason I do this in Microsoft Excel and not Google Sheets because Microsoft Excel is much better at this. So what this is saying is I had to, in order to make these projections, make a bunch of guesses. What is the exit cap, the exit cap rate, which is basically just the inverse of the multiple going to be on our NOI when we exit, which is a reflection of what is the economy going to be when we exit. I have no idea what the economy is going to be in 10 years. I'm talking to brokers. I'm talking to, I'm looking at comps for the area. I'm doing my best to come up with what I think is a reasonable guess, but I could be wrong.
Hmm.
I could be wrong about a lot of the guesses that go into this thing. And so a lot of the things in here that are guesses, it's useful. And so you can see some of the ones that we do here, but it's useful to look at what happens if it's a different number. And so you can do these things called data tables in Excel. It's kind of fun, but so like this one, for example, we assumed, this is collection loss. Remember, this is how much like I assume we're going to collect that we're not going to collect out of that
Yeah,
gross
bouncing
revenue
checks.
because yeah, exactly. The bouncing checks from someone who never catches it up, right? That
Yeah.
money's gone, right? So this is an evicted tenant with a balance, basically. And what about the vacancy? Well, in this case, I assumed a 4% I assumed a 4% collection loss plus a 4% vacancy. What if I'm wrong on those? How does that impact the return? So here's this IRR sensitivity where it looks at if you want to know what if the collections loss was 8% and the vacancy was 8%. So that's much bigger numbers. Then the projected IRR goes from
20.
20.4 to 17.5.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see what the impact. So in that case, it's not that big of a, so I might say like, that's not that sensitive. Like 18% is still a fantastic return. Right.
Hmm.
So that's actually like, I feel pretty good about that. Like, even if I'm wrong here, we're still going to be okay. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But
Hmm.
the same thing here, like what's the stabilized vacancy versus the market rent growth? You can see this one is much more sensitive. The market
Hmm.
rent growth, we're assuming 4%. We'll usually try to do at least a 5% increase every year, which is that's kind of like for the market rent, that's what we do. So I tried to be conservative and picked 4, but hey, what if we're wrong? Well, if the rent doesn't increase at all, I think that's pretty unlikely over a 10-year span. But if it doesn't increase at all, and we're correct with our vacancy rate, then now we're down at a 14% return. We're still not
Hmm.
losing, it's still not negative. We're not losing money, but it's not as good of a return, right? So there you go. And do you think the market rent growth should be 3%? Okay, then the projected return's 19 instead of 20, right? So you can kind of, it allows, I can share this with an investor. And if they disagree with my assumption, okay, here, put this number in. There's the projected return. Is that still attractive to you or not?
Yeah.
So it just kind of allows you to see what's going on there. So that's what's going on here with the sensitivity tab. And you can do this with like any of the variables that are in here. It's really, in this case, we even had some lots that were questionable whether we could use them. We had a few lots where it's like, hey, not sure if we're going to be able to use that lot. And so what happens if we have less lots? How much of an impact is that? So it just allows you to study exit. And I didn't get to there's an exit cap rate in one here somewhere. And you always want to have one of these things for exit cap rate as well.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that
so
would be a big
that's,
one.
I've got it in here somewhere, but yeah, you've got the exit cap rate is a big one because that's one you can always be wrong about.
Hmm.
Another thing you want to look at is can you refi out? So a trap you can get into is coming in with too high leverage, especially if it's a short-term loan. 10-year loan is you're never going to have a problem. But if you come in with really high leverage on a loan that's going to balloon in 2 years, what happens if the economy tanks? What happens if you don't do as well as you
You
thought on
mean
the
the
NOI?
multifamily market back in 2021?
But now, multifamily market's still
Crashing into a wall at
recovering.
200 miles an hour with non-extendable
Uh-huh.
debt and variable interest rate? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's exact. So I plug in here like, hey, what happens if the NOI decreases? What happens if the interest rates go up? What happens if the cap rate goes up, which means the value goes down? And then
Hmm.
what happens if all of that stuff happens? And making sure that even if all of these things happen, we still can at least refinance enough out to cover the loan. In this case, I like to do longer term debt, so it's this one almost always passes because we're
Hmm.
doing usually 10, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 10. I don't do these 2 and 3 year loans,
No, that doesn't
which are
seem
the
like a good
bridge loans,
idea.
which are really where a lot of the apartments got burned the last few
Yep.
years. But anyway, that's a check that we do always do. Um, uh,
Yeah, actually, that was the only LP investment that Liz and I have made in the last 5 years where we screwed up. It was one of my very first deals, and the lead sponsor bought multifamily like everybody else was doing at the time with 2 year note variable interest. And
ooh,
when interest rates shot up, so that property has never cash flowed. We've never received one of those quarterly checks, and every 3 months that goes by and I get the reports, I grind my teeth. But lesson learned. That was what I call a tuition. That is not a mistake that I will ever make again, because you get taught the first time that, hey, you don't ever buy into deals that have variable interest rates and short-term debt. At least not with my risk profile. Maybe if you're someone who wants to take more risk and get more returns, sure, that might be a good fit for you, but that wasn't something that was a good fit for me.
yeah, yeah. Always ask about that's another always ask about what's the debt,
Yeah,
what's the interest rate, does is it fixed? How long is it fixed? Sometimes they're fixed, but like ours will reset it. Ours has a 5 year rate reset, so we do have a rate reset, but it's not ballooning until 10, so we don't actually
yeah,
have to pay the thing off till 10. So it's
yeah.
a much safer debt, and that is one thing about commercial real estate. It's not a house, right? Like you don't get those 30-year fixed rate things. So
No.
you've always got to think about the debt. Yeah.
All right, Cory. Well, I want to here we can turn the screen share off now. We'll wrap up. I want to thank you very much for the time that you spent with us. Obviously, this was intended to be a pretty detailed dive into what underwriting looks like for people who maybe haven't done it before or haven't done it in a really long time. You being the super spreadsheet geek that I know you are, I couldn't literally think of anyone better to do this with. Especially because I'm getting to look at deals that my own money's in, so that was pretty cool, getting a deeper insight into seeing how you do it. So thank you very much for your time. For anyone that wants to get a hold of you, what's the one easiest way for them to do that?
PassiveMHP.com. You can check out some free info there, book a call if you want to chat with me.
Okay.
I'm a nerd. I love talking about this stuff. So
All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, please do give that little like button a click. And if you have questions for Cory or for myself, just leave those down in the comments below, because they will get read and you will get an answer. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see future videos from this channel, consider subscribing here on YouTube and also visiting investwithtrent.com, where there'll be more resources available to you. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.